It is a manifestation of pride, and people may wonder why pride is so important to our community. Pride is important because all of us, almost without exception, grow up from an early age with a sense of being different or not good enough, whatever that might be, or later on treatment by family, community and more broadly. But with that notion of shame, it's very corrosive of the spirit and can be crippling. And the only way through that is a personal journey towards pride, because pride is the opposite of shame.
It's once in a century that a city builds an institution of such social significance. I think the last one was probably the Victorian Trades Hall.
We've seen the rise of right-wing politics and a more militant and frankly more violent form of right-wing politics as well, including addressed against the queer community and including at the Pride Centre. So it becomes very pointed all of a sudden that it's actually like a safe space in the literal sense as well as in the figurative sense. And even, as I say, even when it was opened a year ago, that didn't seem to me like the key point of the building. But that need, I suppose, or role has greatly increased even in that short period, which is a very sobering development. And I think the building fulfills that purpose very well because it's a pretty tough building in the sense of its materiality and its sense of safety. So I think that's one of the strengths of it, that it actually can act as a kind of bastion or beachhead against hostile forces.
So the robustness of the materiality and perhaps the curvaceous form sort of enveloping people and the portico, all of that sort of works towards this safe space, this kind of layering. So it's a very curvaceous, baroque, playful, joyful place, but at the same time it feels quite sort of sheltered and safe and protective.
Jude rang one day. We have worked together over years on a number of projects. She said that she was interested in a building for the LGBTI community, and could we talk about it? I said, yeah, of course we can. And it was the start of an extraordinary adventure.
In about April 2017, I approached Dimity Reid and said, Dimity, have I got a job for you to do? Which was to get the design brief going.
Jude who could lead you into any sort of adventure, and is brilliantly organised. And so then we started, there was a committee formed, we met, from my memory, every Thursday for 3 years, but I think that's incorrect. Probably once a month for a number of years. And slowly moving on the whole idea of how we'd progress it, what we wanted to achieve out of it, what the group wanted. We needed a brief. And so there were about, I think from memory, about 30 groups and committees and projects run within this community. And so I went and talked to all of them about, this is an idea, we think we can make it happen. How would your group work with it? And everybody was excited, a little quizzical, I'd have to say. Nobody quite believed that it would happen. Or it just seems such an amazing idea to bring a lot of people together who, had not been brought together.
So one of the major things that we did was to see if we could run an expression of interest process, which we commenced in November 2016. And we had 3 councils respond: Melbourne City Council, City of Port Phillip and City of Yarra.
And we looked at opportunities. I knew that the Munro's restaurant was for sale. They were selling it with a planning permit for apartments. And I knew the two Greek brothers who owned it, and I said to them, hang on to it. This might be the right place, with the history of the site, with having gay and lesbian events here through the years. And for me, the vision I had was to get Munro's, to use the car park at the back, and also to use the chemist, and to have this whole piece of land as a corner site. And yes, so we put a bid in, we interviewed local people, and we did a whole history of what St Kilda meant to the gay community, with the Pride March and everything else, the history of the street.
I guess through the history of queer and trans space, for instance, is that we've had to imagine our own utopias. And I feel like that was really part of, the initial vision for the Pride Centre.
In some ways, it's hard to make the distinction between the building and the quite incredible and totally admirable way in which, that group of people, the board, mobilised themselves to make this possible, which was, they were so canny and they were so strategic, and they gathered the funds and they made the project happen. So I think, I really say hats off to them.
It was just before Christmas, I think, in 2017, when the board was made aware of the winning entry.
We started construction early 2019. Then the major basement works. It's a public car park underneath the building with a few car parks for the Pride Centre. A welcome to country smoking ceremony was performed by the traditional custodians of the land, the Boonwurrung people and the Wurundjeri. We collaborated with artist and Yellowkut Willem member Jarrah Steele through the design process to establish a raft of future initiatives to engage with the deeper culture of place, both historic and contemporary.
We tried our best to make the building to be inclusive, not saying that it's exclusive for other people.
The Victorian Pride Centre is part of an emerging building typology of purpose-built LGBTIQ+ community centres built through contributions from public funding and philanthropy. It consolidates a lot of discrete services including arts, culture, health, family and youth services, events and facilities and so on. And we're starting to see an emergence of a few of these types of built centres for members of the LGBTIQ+ community, which have opened in the preceding 2 decades, mainly in predominantly wealthy English-speaking cities. And you can find them in Los Angeles, Manchester, Salt Lake City and San Francisco. The VPC is dominated by the form of arches that mark the portico on a street fronting northwest elevation. This geometry avoids direct references, popular signifiers or metaphors of the LGBTIQ+ community. Instead, it's derived from the ornamental arches and vaults that were found in the neighbourhood's early 20th century mansions and pleasure gardens. And so you can see references to the Esplanade Vaults, Luna Park and the Catani Arch. The extroverted street facade of the centre may loom large, but it doesn't always feel celebratory. If you remember back on December 8, 2022, a small group representing the European Australian Movement and Nationalist Socialist Network appeared out in front of the VPC to protect Glitter Nova, an event for drag performances, queer stand-up comedy, musical acts, and garment making workshops for people aged 12 to 25. An estimated 50 to 80 counter-protesters who supported the event turned up to confront the far-right protesters, although the event had already been cancelled by the local government. The act of building and the demonstration that followed outside the front of the VPC highlights that actual sexual and gender equality has not been reached, and these rights must constantly be defended.
James contacted me initially and said, well, look, we're both St Kilda architects, I think we should go into this thing together with our different experiences, different local knowledge and also scope in architecture. So we got together and thought, well, yeah, what a great opportunity to develop a response to this competition entry.
We sought architectural clues that connected to this context of St Kilda, believing that if we could embody a spirit of place, that it might have that familiar inclusive St Kilda vibe. Thus the exploration of tropes such as the extreme curvature, pop objects, overgrown terraces, and bleached seaside concrete structures.
Grant jumped off very quickly, and we went to his office one night to see how things were going with just placing program on the site, and he had this very sort of informal and beautifully blobby sort of approach.
Looking at buildings that have arches, have vaults, and the specific ones to mention, one of the first was always the Catani Arch Bridge between the Stoke House, looking through to the sea. So this creates a kind of tube, semicircular tube view. Many other arch buildings, the St Kilda vaults under the Esplanade, which were little shops, and they actually were cellar-like tubular dwellings. There's Desborough O'Neill's house with the arched front. There's even ARM's the Luna Park face reappropriated with copper and tubes that are cut out of at the corner of Ackland and Carlisle Street is another reference.
We came back and looked at structural grids, and we sort of made each of the structural bays a bubble. We tried to put the bubbles together, inspired by some work in a book called Sightless that has always been a great joy to have a look at. We couldn't get the bubbles to work. By this time, our contextual feedback was telling us that St Kilda is full of this sort of Moorish, delightful, romantic architecture. It's there's arches and barrel vaults and domes and so on there, and we looked at this idea of extruding a series of barrel vaults through the building, still keeping these fairly soft, abstract forms, but rationalising it in a very, profound way. We're also very excited by the fact that they got in the way and we had to carve into them to fit the program into the building. The pragmatics started hitting with this formal idea, and we were delighted by the effects of what we were doing when we were carving program into these conceptual tubes.
But then we experimented with tubes, and the tubes really sort of unlocked the problem. All of a sudden the building was connecting to the street at the front and at the back, and within the building everything was connecting to one another, so it really became a great answer. And then we took the total town planning maximum envelope and sort of carved away to get our programs in it. And when carving, for instance, the scallops at the back of the building to maintain the existing peppercorn trees, we were carving through the bundle of tubes, and so that creates all this extraordinary geometry, and the sort of architecture starts to emerge just through the process. The most evident place where this happens is the ellipsoid, the atrium, where the tubes pass through the shell. You get all those incredible curves.
But I had in the back of my mind that if an iconic design would mean two things. It would mean a building that the LGBTIQ community could be very proud of, to be the welcoming home that you'd worked out it needed to be, but also in terms of the support from the Victorian Premier, an iconic design would bring them along with that journey of probably a bit more money than the $15 million that they'd initially indicated. And I think we knew it was going to be tough raising the funds, but we then all committed to supporting the winning iconic design.
That's it. It was terrific. And the result is extraordinary.
I mean, I remember when the competition was announced, and I remember thinking, okay, here we go. I really thought we were going to end up with a giant mirror ball or a drag queen's headdress or something like that. I just thought, ooh, this could really be awkward. But of course, that's not what we've ended up with. And I think the architects' move to not be explicitly referential like that, or figurative, let's say, was a really good move, because they've effectively, they've gone into architectural procedures of this kind of artificial form generation, which are not, they're not a giant mirror ball. So it does have flamboyance, of course. It's got formal invention and excitement in these, these cut tubes. And I must say, I particularly like the ovoid, the pointed the pointed arches, I think, is a real high point of the building for me. Less so the circular elements, but yeah, I mean, I think those kinds of formal procedures of artificial form generation, which are very familiar, of course, in Melbourne architecture, it's particularly interesting iteration of those kinds of procedures, which we've seen in ARM, we've seen in Alliance, we've seen in many other architects' work. This is a good example of kind of late style, I think.
To provide space within these arches and vaults for the LGBTIQ+ communities can be considered the making of queer space. It's a term that emerged in Western architectural thought in the 1990s to emphasise architecture as a lens through which to understand how power relationships and identities, such as those relating to gender and sexuality, are constructed. So, queer space could refer to spaces that challenge heteronormativity and patriarchy in how these social systems organise people. It can also refer to a location where LGBTIQ+ people may congregate, like a Pride Centre, or even a bar or park, or more potently, it can be used as a verb to challenge norms through the use of space over time. The challenge of architectural convention is evident upon entering the Pride Centre. Entering this building for some is an act of coming out, of associating as part of something larger, and taking part in a collective experience of trauma, self-expression, celebration, or even liberation. Perceptions of safety upon entering are important. This is assisted by a throuple, the concierge cafe and lounge, located in the three-barrel tunnel to provide multiple spaces that may thwart the dominance of one user group. Clear sight lines and exit points are further tactics to enhance safety. Passing through the threshold deep into the building, a further subtraction exercise, an ellipsoid rotated off-grid, creates the atrium void across 5 levels to break deep floor plates. It's light and uplifting, with variations of solidity and transparency making you feel like you're part of something larger. At its centre is a grandstand, its infrastructure for the performative within us, as there's nowhere to hide. It conceals sightlines to a theatre, a bookstore and a bar beyond. Despite the resistance of overt LGBTQI+ storytelling in the form finding of the architects, there are gestures towards cultural signifiers of belonging and memory. Rising above the building on the 1,000 square metre roof terrace with a view towards Naam, the Bunurong word for Port Phillip Bay, a 50-metre flagpole with the rainbow flag unabashedly towers over the rooftop held by 10 poles that pay tribute to various individuals. If you look closely, on one plaque it's written, "In remembrance of my lover and best friend for 17 years, John Paul McCatchin, who died from AIDS on February 15, 2008.
The initial response was a sort of planning resolution of the brief as well as three-dimensional, where we were going to go three-dimensionally. And we're always really aware of the building being placed in a kind of St Kilda example, or St Kilda-ish style building, that it would sit well in the site. The concept was looking at bubbles and free space and what it is about LGBTI space and queer space, as well as overlapping that with something to do with St Kilda. Eventually, what was explored further was, I guess, the idea of what is a building in St Kilda about? What are the special qualities and the exoticness and particular qualities of St Kilda-ish buildings which conjured up the sea baths, conjured up domes, Catani Tower, that exotic Moorish Spanish mission style of architecture that St Kilda was an explosion of in the 1910s and 1920s. So that started to produce a response that was curves and arches and bubbles and tubes and that sort of thing. And eventually James and Steve developed this idea of the tube running through the block. It became a theme to actually formulate the building.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like the atrium is, obviously is the kind of the showstopper. And when I first visited the building, I was once again really conscious that this it could have gone wrong, you know, the detailing of a space like that, particularly with the fiberglass shell, I must say, that could have gone wrong. They could have easily fluffed it, but they didn't fluff it. It's really, I think, genuinely a spectacular and beautiful space. And the raked seating, it works really well. It's a stage, it's seating, it's, it can be the audience, it can be the performer. The skylit, of course, the clients speak very movingly about the power of the metaphor of light flooding in. Of course, there's talk about it being an emu egg, and there's talk of eels and all of those kinds of things, which, as far as I'm concerned, that just means that the form is rich, and it means people can bring their own interpretations to what it means and even where it came from. So, the atrium space is pretty special, I think.
The egg came in very early from our point of view as a sort of looking at the planning and resolving the brief. So the egg was always a pivot point in the building, and it was the central core, and around that all the planning would evolve. And that central core became a circulation core, and it took the shape of an oval.
It's definitely one of those things where you walk in and you feel like you belong, you feel like you're safe. I mean, there are sort of three, maxims that I think of in terms of space, and I think of safety, and I think of belonging, and I think of permanence. And I think what I enjoy about the Pride Centre is that those three virtues are really well represented. Like, it is a safe space. It is a place where, as a community, and as cohorts, like, we feel like we belong there. But there's a real sense of permanence. Like, it's bricks and mortar. Like, it's it's a real part of the city now, and it's a place that will always be there. Like, we were talking before about the portico and how that reaches out onto the street. So you sort of can't get more of a sort of a grasp onto the land than you can there.
We've designed a community garden and events pavilion for the rooftop, which is about to be constructed. The roof's used for all sorts of events, such as the Melbourne Queer Film Festival, parties, weddings, funerals, anything really.
This is the interior model of the Pride, and we're starting with the ground floor level. This is a sort of virtual explanation of the tubes running through. So you've got the smaller ovoid tube and the circular main tube. The theatre space is a very important part as you drive down into the car park. So as I spin the model around, we're now looking at the Jackson Street end here, with the scallops set out from the two trees that we've kept, and creating an external courtyard here. So I might put the next level on. So this is mezzanine level now being dropped in. You might also quickly notice we've got a circular bulkhead over here, and the bar shape is a triangle. That represents safe space. International is a triangle within a circle, represents a safe space. So we use that graphic. Now, mezzanine should fit, there it is. And what is particular interest is this main core and atrium stair. So that starts this internal egg-shaped, with it's being cut out as the tubes run through. First floor on, and this is the main VPC resident group's floor. As you either come up the lift or up another stair, you arrive at the first floor level. This one here is the Joy radio station, the various studios, and then the next level, level 2, sits on top. This whole level has been taken over by Star Health. Level 3 sits on top of that. We're now capping off the thing with the roof, and yes, it fits. Look at that. As we look up, we can start to look through this thing.
We titled the project Building the Unfinished, and it's about creating a place that's just full of potential that's constantly transforming itself.
They certainly speak about it as a space of becoming. And it was really very interesting speaking to the architects around their initial concepts about the ruin. And I mean, not at all surprisingly, that was not, a super popular concept amongst the client group because, especially for a group that has really experienced a lot of travail over the years, you don't necessarily want to think of ruins, but it's of course such a rich architectural concept of ruin, what can emerge from the ruin, and also the undoing of the whole. So you can flip that and turn it into a process of becoming, which is of course very apt metaphor for the process of coming out, becoming yourself, coming to terms with identities, etc. So I think, and the building is still becoming, it's, here we are, it's been open for however long it's been open, and it's not quite finished yet, it's not fully occupied, it's still got elements that haven't quite happened. So I think that process of becoming is very real and is very rich.
There were three inspirations, I suppose: the client, the site, and our contemporary understandings of various design processes and so on.
When I was writing about the project, I spoke reasonably extensively to the architects, and they were very open about how they themselves are not members of the LGBTIQ community, which I don't think is a problem. I mean, I think it's essential that architects are able to design for people who are not themselves, and that kind of empathy and indeed detailed briefing is a key part of the architect's skill, I think. So, and I guess the proof of that is the way that the project has been taken up by the community. Because I suppose, I mean, in my head, I was really, kind of had this vision of the young person probably, but maybe not a young person, who's just sort of starting to think that maybe they are part of the community that this building embraces, and they're walking past and trying to pluck up the confidence to go in. And this happens, I can tell you from personal experience that it does happen. And I think with the kind of solidification on the street edge, there's an embracing quality to that space.
I've done quite a lot of research on Deleuzean concepts because it was part of some study I was doing earlier. So I was looking for a way of connecting theories of queer space or LGBTQI perspectives on architectural form and space, etc. And I wondered whether or not there was any books that had reference to Deleuze in them in the queer space sort of theoretical discussion. And I think I just Googled, books on queer space with references to Deleuze, and up came one book in particular which I immediately purchased and read. And I felt suddenly this was my way into this body of theory. It was via the concepts, the Deleuzean concepts that the LGBTQI theorists were using to discuss and debate their engagement with reality, I suppose. And so, yes, issues of emergence and becoming, deterritorialisation, a whole series of Deleuzean ideas then started to drive, sort of underpinned various decisions that we were making. This idea of coexistence and no hierarchy. There was an idea that, the male-female sort of binary opposition and how there's a whole spectrum in between that can be fulfilled. And then Deleuze theory saying that forget the binary opposition. There is only difference, so it's not about identity, it's about difference, and difference in its own right. His idea of becoming, or this idea of not identity but immanence, etc., sort of opened up this spectrum of existence. And so we started bringing these theories in and saying, how do we make architecture out of this? So how we tried to manifest some of this theory, this idea of becoming, for instance, one of the Deleuzean references that are being used by the LGBTQI community, was this idea that the building maybe was always, we didn't want it to be too slick or complete or finished. We wanted to make it we wanted it to appear as if it was in a constant state of becoming something other than it is at the present moment. And obviously during construction that's literally true. But what we were really interested in is the idea that once the building is finished, how can we facilitate or encourage engagement and the tenants of the building adding things and changing things, and how do we do this without it destroying maybe some of the ideas that are driving the building?
We also sought an extroverted program where outdoor public social life could be integral to the building's character and operations. A bit like the St Kilda balconies of the 70s and 80s where they were teeming with life.
So there's almost 20 organisations who you facilitated in terms of the design brief, who committed to becoming tenants. We've got services operating out of it. There's celebrations, there's been opera performed, concerts performed, drag shows. It's been an absolute hoot. And people's life celebrations, there's been some funerals also conducted at the centre. So it's been this wonderful, welcoming home for people, and it's now so much a part of the LGBTIQ community.
And it's really a world leader in it too.
The Pride Centre as an institution is in its infancy. It's not about just building the building and moving in and everything's great. It still has to build trust and build a relationship with all different cohorts of the community. Like the Rainbow, cohort is a very diverse cohort. We've got lots of things going on even this week about, who can be in the space and all those sorts of things. And, but it's all about, I guess, like, what does the Pride Centre stand for? What is Pride about? Is Pride about privilege? Is Pride about protest? For me, it's about protest. For me, it's about being in service to community. So that's the sort of centre that I really want to see.
It's made an extraordinary contribution, I think, yes, physically to the street and to Melbourne as a whole, as a coherent way for this complex community to get together and celebrate and get all the information they need. Getting young kids there.
Absolutely, with -18 and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think the design of the building, you remember our discussions about it needing to be uplifting, that it needed to be somewhere where people would be welcome,
yes,
and would feel at home, but to have a sense of lightness, brightness, and those elements that are in the design. For us in the LGBTI community, the queer community, that capacity with the atrium to get that sense of coming out, the light flooding in, and the honeycomb effect, the busy bee, so the busyness of actually a centre.
This 1910s, 20s, 30s period of exoticness, and we wanted the building to have a lushness and exoticness and exuberance.
One of our board members just cried because they were just so in awe of the design, as were we all. So we're delighted with the design because it does fulfil the brief, which was about having a home that our community, the LGBTI community, could be proud of, a place for celebration, and also a safe and sustainable home for the community. And what that design that Brearley Architects and Urbanists and Grant Amon came up with, what it did is it really manifests pride. It does it through things like it has a portico that pushes out over the footpath into the public domain. So we're not hiding anywhere. We're actually thrusting ourselves forward into the public domain proudly. It's topped by a 15-metre flagpole, which almost doubles the height of the building. And it might seem a bit ephemeral, but it's really important that we're visible and we can have that flagpole used as a symbol of pride on days of particular importance to our community.
The Pride Centre is unique, particularly for the state of Victoria in that sense, is that we have a place where different parts of culture and representation and advocacy and care all come together in this wonderful little incubator.